My name is Amira, and on the morning they prepared me for execution,
I realized how strange it is to feel the world slow down while your heart speeds up. I was 30 years old, a woman who had once walked through gilded hallways with silk brushing my ankles. Yet now I sat on the cold stone floor of a basement cell, barefoot, wrapped in a thin white garment that felt more like a burial shroud than clothing.
The guards had woken me before dawn. I still remember the metallic click of the key turning in my door,
the faint echo of their boots, and the smell of iron and dust that filled the air as they stepped inside. The moment I saw their faces, I knew it was time. There was no need for words. Their silence said everything. They instructed me to stand, and my legs trembled beneath me, as they tied my hands loosely, not tightly. Because I was already broken, they performed the ritual inspection required before an execution. One guard read a list of charges in a flat voice, but the words barely registered. Deception, dishonor, barrenness. It's strange how a single word can redefine your entire existence. Barrenness. That was the crime that condemned me more than anything else. I had been the third wife of Prince Abdullah, and after years of pressure, prayers, and examinations, my body had betrayed me. I could not conceive a child, and in the palace, that made me worse than useless. It made me dangerous. As the guards escorted me out of my cell, the first rays of morning light slipped through a small window above the courtyard. The world looked almost beautiful in that moment, peach-colored sky, cool air against my face, yet the beauty felt cruel. Have you ever experienced a moment when life seemed to continue normally for everyone else while your own world was collapsing? That contrast is a sharp kind of pain, like watching people smile on the street while you drown quietly beneath the surface. They led me toward the black SUV waiting just outside the prison door. Every step echoed louder than footsteps should, as if the ground itself wanted to remember the sound of a woman walking to her death. When they opened the car door, I hesitated, not because I wanted to run, but because something in my spirit whispered that stepping inside that vehicle would end one story and begin another. At the time, I didn't know what that whisper meant. Now I do. The interior of the SUV was cold, sterile, and silent. Sheikh Mohammed, the religious advisor, sat beside me. His eyes were unreadable, but his presence carried a weight of finality. He held a small book of prayers, and while the guards drove, he murmured verses under his breath. I wondered if he truly believed what he was saying, or if he repeated those words simply because he had said them so many times before. I wanted to ask him, but my voice felt trapped behind a wall of exhaustion and fear. We drove through the streets of Riyadh, and I pressed my forehead lightly against the tinted window, watching life move around us. Children walking to school, vendors sweeping dust from their shop fronts, women carrying baskets of fresh bread, people living their ordinary mornings, unaware that a condemned woman was passing by. In that strange quiet, I felt a mix of emotions: fear, sadness, numbness, and somewhere deep inside, a whisper of hope I didn't dare acknowledge. I asked myself silently, if God sees me, why is this happening? If God loves me, why am I alone? As the SUV turned into a busier intersection, the light turned red. I watched the world outside slow to a pause. A man on a bike balanced one foot on the ground. A mother adjusted her daughter's headscarf. A flock of pigeons lifted from a rooftop. The scene felt suspended in time, like the last breath before everything changes. And then it happened. A delivery truck barreled through the red light at full speed. I didn't hear the crash at first. I felt it. A violent jolt, a burst of white light, the world twisting upside down. Metal screamed. Glass shattered. Something struck my shoulder, another object hit my cheek, and Sheikh Mohammed slammed into the door beside me. The SUV rolled once, twice, then slammed hard against a concrete barrier. The air filled with the smell of gasoline and burning rubber. For a moment, there was silence. A heavy, unnatural silence that made my ears ring. I blinked, trying to understand whether I was alive or dead. My head felt heavy, my body limp, but consciousness clung to me stubbornly. When I finally managed to move my hand, it came away bloody from a cut above my eyebrow. The taste of iron filled my mouth. The guards in the front seat were groaning, one barely conscious, the other motionless. Sheikh Mohammed lay slumped beside me, blood trickling from his temple. The rear of the SUV had caved inward, but the back window miraculously had shattered into large pieces that left a narrow opening, an opening just big enough for a person to slip through. I stared at that opening, barely able to process what I was seeing. My breath came in shaky bursts. Part of me knew that this was a chance no human person had arranged, a chance that shouldn't have existed. Another part of me was terrified. What would happen if they survived and I ran? What if I was caught? What if this was a test? My heart pounded against my ribs like a warning drum. But then something strange happened. I felt a warmth move through my chest, gentle, urging, almost like a hand resting lightly over my heart. A quiet whisper stirred inside me. Not in words, but in a feeling. Move. I didn't know where it came from, but it filled me with a courage I hadn't felt in months. I unbuckled my seatbelt with trembling hands and crawled toward the shattered window. Broken glass sliced my robe and scratched my arms, but I didn't stop. When I pulled myself through the opening and landed on the pavement, the sunlight hit my face like a blessing. People were beginning to gather, shouting, calling for help, staring at the wreckage, but no one looked at me. Not closely, not enough to stop me. I was alive, free, standing on a street where no one knew my name, in torn execution robes, with nothing but the air in my lungs and the faint whisper of something I couldn't understand guiding my steps. What I thought was the end of my life was actually the moment Jesus began writing his rescue into my story. Though I did not know him yet, not truly, not personally, but he already knew me, and he was coming for me. I was born into a world that looked perfect from the outside, a world that sparkled with gold and perfume and carefully orchestrated elegance. When I close my eyes now, I can still smell the oud incense that wafted through the hallways of my childhood home. I can still hear the soft clicking of the maids' slippers as they walked across polished marble, the distant hum of fountains in the courtyard, the quiet murmurs of servants who lowered their eyes whenever I passed. To the world, I had everything, but even as a child, something inside me felt like a tightly coiled spring, always pulled in directions I didn't choose. My mother often told me the story of my birth, as if it were a prophecy. "Amira," she would say, smoothing my hair with hands that always trembled slightly. "You were born under a blessed star. You will marry a prince. You will be the jewel of this family." I didn't understand then that these words were not blessings, but chains. Even at 6 years old, I could sense that my mother's love for me was wrapped in expectation. She spoke of beauty as a responsibility, of obedience as a virtue, of silence as a kind of protection. "Good girls do not question," she whispered often. "Good girls accept what is written." I grew up absorbing these messages like ink soaking into paper. Every day felt like a training ground. My mother taught me how to pour tea without letting the cup clink against the saucer. She corrected the angle of my shoulders whenever I sat. She taught me how to smile in a way that hid my real emotions, how to lower my eyes without appearing weak, how to speak just softly enough to sound gentle but not bold. "A wife must be soft," she repeated. "Soft like silk, soft like the moonlight." There were moments, though, when I escaped into the narrow slivers of freedom a privileged girl could find. I would climb the stairs to the rooftop garden and lie under the night sky, watching stars glitter above the city. Up there, away from expectations, I felt myself breathe differently. I remember asking God silently, "Who am I when no one is watching?" But I never found an answer. Maybe because no one had ever shown me that I was allowed to exist outside of the role they scripted for me. When I turned 12, my world shifted more sharply toward destiny. That was the year my mother enrolled me in what she called the refinement school. It was a place hidden behind high walls where daughters of elite families were shaped, molded for future marriages to powerful men. We weren't taught mathematics or literature as much as we were instructed in posture, etiquette, the psychology of obedience, and the subtle art of pleasing without seeming eager. Every morning, we stood in long lines while instructors inspected our nails, our hair, our posture. Perfection wasn't requested, it was demanded. The lessons became more intense as we grew older. They taught us how to speak to a husband, how to avoid speaking too much, how to anticipate needs before they were voiced. We were told repeatedly that a woman's value came from her womb, that her loyalty was proven through her children, that honor rested in her ability to produce life. At the time, I absorbed these teachings like any young girl wanting to please the adults she trusted. But deep inside, a small part of me recoiled, uncomfortable with how much of my identity was tied to something I couldn't control. I remember one class in particular. The instructor, an older woman with eyes sharp as blades, walked down the row of girls and said, "Your body is your family's reputation. Guard it, use it wisely, and above all, make it fruitful." Fruitful. That word lodged itself deep into my subconscious, long before I understood how painfully it would return later. Even though everything around me seemed beautiful, something about my life felt scripted, almost theatrical. I lived inside a golden set, but the script was not mine. And sometimes, children sense truth long before they can articulate it. I sensed that love in my family was conditional, that worth had rules, that I could only belong if I followed them perfectly. At 18, when girls my age in other parts of the world were choosing universities or dreaming about careers, I was being groomed for marriage. My mother spoke often to me in hushed tones about the prince who had noticed me during a family gathering. She told me this was the opportunity she had been preparing me for since the day I could walk. I remember nodding, smiling, pretending to be excited. But deep inside, I felt a faint tremor of something I did not yet know how to name. Dread. Looking back now, I can see that my childhood was a palace made of silk and sorrow. Every room glittered with luxury, but every door locked from the outside. I lived in what I now call a golden cage, a beautiful prison where I was adored as long as I conformed, praised as long as I obeyed, valued only for the future children I had not yet conceived. Have you ever felt like you were living a life designed by others? Have you ever sensed that people loved the version of you they created, not the person you truly were? That was my reality long before the real suffering began. And I did not know then that the longing in my heart, the longing to be seen, known, loved without conditions, was a longing only one person could ever satisfy. I just hadn't met him yet. The year I turned 19 should have been the brightest year of my life, at least according to everything I had been taught. My mother called it the year of fulfillment, the year all her preparation would finally bear fruit. I remember the day she came into my room with a soft smile, one of those smiles she reserved for moments heavy with expectation. She sat beside me on the edge of my bed, held my hands and said, "Amira, your future has been decided. Prince Abdullah has chosen you." For a short moment, time froze. I felt the world tilt just slightly, like the first warning tremor before an earthquake. The words "has chosen you" sounded romantic to anyone who didn't understand the full weight behind them. But to me, they felt more like a verdict. I hardly knew the prince. I had seen him only a handful of times during official gatherings, always from a polite distance. He was older, composed, surrounded by formality. I knew nothing about him except what the whispers said: powerful, disciplined, ambitious. And now I was to be part of the intricate architecture of his life, a decorative addition, a strategic alliance, a potential mother to his future heirs. The weeks before my wedding passed in a blur of fabric fittings, etiquette rehearsals, and endless preparations. Every morning, women in elegant uniforms came to my room carrying trays of jewelry and possible dress selections. Designers circled me like architects examining a structure. Servants whispered about colors, patterns, and symbolism. I stood there, letting them study me, touch me, adjust me, as though I were a statue carved for public display. Inside, my real self receded further and further away, like a faint echo slipping down a long corridor. On the night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. I stood by the window of my room, looking out at the glow of the city lights. Cars moved like glowing insects in the distance. The wind carried the scent of jasmine from the courtyard below. Everything looked calm, peaceful, and yet the pressure in my chest felt unbearable. I whispered quietly into the dark room, "God, are you there? Do you hear me?" But no answer came, not even the sense that someone was listening. The wedding day was a spectacle of opulence. Hundreds of guests filled the hall. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above us like frozen stars. The air shimmered with perfume and soft music. Everyone told me I looked radiant. Everyone told me how lucky I was. Everyone told me how honored I should feel. And I smiled the way I had been taught to smile, graceful, gentle, controlled. But behind the smile, my thoughts drifted like a small bird desperately trying to find a crack in the cage. When the ceremony ended and the royal photographers captured the final portraits, my new life began with the slow closing of a heavy palace gate. That sound, deep, metallic, final, was the sound of my childhood ending. The palace was breathtaking, a labyrinth of marble hallways and shimmering rooms. The ceilings seemed impossibly high, adorned with gold patterns. But despite the beauty, something felt eerily hollow, as if every corridor concealed a secret I was not meant to understand. Servants guided me through the halls, explaining which areas were reserved for which wife, which rooms I could enter, which times were appropriate for meals, for prayers, for visits. The hierarchy was invisible but strict. Wife number 1 had authority. Wife number 2 had experience. Wife number 3, me, had potential, but only if I fulfilled it. The first few weeks felt like a dream I was trying my best to interpret. Prince Abdullah treated me with polite distance, as if I were both important and replaceable. He spoke kindly, but the kindness carried duty behind it, not affection. Every interaction felt rehearsed, formal, almost businesslike. And I realized very quickly that the palace did not revolve around love. It revolved around lineage. Every meal, every prayer, every conversation, even the medical checkups, everything was designed to evaluate one thing: how soon I would become pregnant. At first, I tried to embrace the role, believing this was my destiny. But as the pressure increased, something inside me started to fracture. I began to feel like my entire existence had been reduced to a single biological function. My dreams, thoughts, personality, and desires all faded behind the blinding spotlight aimed at my womb. There were nights I lay awake staring at the carved ceiling, wondering who I would be if I weren't wrapped in royal expectations. I wondered what it would feel like to make a choice for myself, to be loved not for what I could provide, but simply for who I was. That thought felt dangerous, almost rebellious, so I buried it quickly. But it never disappeared completely. Slowly, I realized that the palace was not a home. It was a system, a beautiful, disciplined machine with clear rules and unforgiving standards. Women were part of that system. Not fully people, more like essential components expected to function reliably. If a component failed, it could be replaced. As months passed, the small disquiet growing inside me became a quiet sorrow. I moved through the palace like a shadow wrapped in silk, performing my duties, wearing my smiles, and answering questions with perfect modesty. Yet deep down, I was aching. I wanted to be seen. I wanted someone to ask me who I was, not just what I could produce. Have you ever lived a life that looked perfect on the outside but felt suffocating on the inside? Have you ever held your breath for so long that you forgot how it felt to breathe freely? For years, I lived like that. In silence, in beauty, in suffocation. And I had no idea that the cracks forming inside me were the very cracks Jesus would one day shine his light through. I wish I could tell you that the early months of my marriage were simply an adjustment period, that the palace slowly became a home and I eventually found my place within its shimmering walls. But that is not the truth. The truth is that the palace was never designed to be a home for women like me. It was designed to be a kingdom within a kingdom, upheld by rules no one questioned and judgments no one escaped. And I, the newest and youngest wife, soon discovered that my position came with a weight I had not been prepared to carry. The first signs were subtle, small comments, glances, and instructions that seemed harmless at first. The head maid, an older woman with sharp eyes, began monitoring everything I did. She corrected how I walked, how I placed my hands during meals, how I greeted the prince. At first, I thought she was simply doing her job, but then she began reporting my smallest mistakes to the senior wives. A missed greeting, a forgotten phrase, a moment when I hesitated before answering a question. Suddenly, every action was being evaluated as if I were a student in an exam that never ended. One afternoon, as I entered the shared lounge area reserved for the wives, Zahara, the first wife, looked up at me with a smile so smooth it felt like silk hiding a blade. "You're late," she said softly, though I wasn't late at all. A wife who respects the household arrives early. Her tone wasn't harsh, but something about it made my stomach tighten. Fatima, the second wife, gave me a sympathetic glance, but she said nothing. In the palace, silence was safer than truth. Days turned into weeks, and the pressure around me grew tighter, like a rope being pulled slowly but relentlessly. There were schedules for every hour of the day. Morning prayer at sunrise, etiquette review, household inspection, a meeting with palace advisors, time with the prince, afternoon prayer, supervised reading time, traditional training, evening prayer, and a formal dinner where every gesture was recorded in the minds of those who watched. My life was no longer mine. Not even my thoughts felt private anymore. The hardest part was the medical examinations. They began gently enough routine checkups, questions about my cycle, herbal teas to prepare my body. But when months passed without a pregnancy, they intensified. The royal physician would enter my quarters with 2 nurses, carrying cold instruments and colder expressions. I would lie on a bed draped in white linen while they took notes, whispered to one another, and examined me in ways that felt more like judgment than care. After each examination, I would wrap myself in my robe and sit by the window, staring at the garden below roses, jasmine, fountains, and wonder how something so beautiful could coexist with the pain inside me. Have you ever looked at a place that should have felt like paradise, but instead felt like a trap? That was my life. A gorgeous prison, silent and merciless. The comments from the senior wives became sharper over time. Zahara, though always poised, never missed an opportunity to remind me of my responsibilities. She would say, I was pregnant within the first year. Fatima too. You must have faith, dear. But what she meant was, what is wrong with you? Fatima, kinder but no less aware of the hierarchy, would place a gentle hand on my arm and whisper, don't worry. Some women take longer, but even her reassurance felt like pity, and pity always carries a sting. As the pressure increased, my body began to react in ways I couldn't hide. My appetite faded, sleep became elusive, my heartbeat often raced for no reason. Some nights, I would wake up gasping, as though invisible hands were squeezing my chest. I didn't know then that these were panic attacks. At the time, I believed I was simply failing as a wife, as a woman, as a daughter to the family who had raised me for this very purpose. One evening, after a particularly difficult dinner where the prince barely spoke to me, I returned to my room and collapsed to the floor. I covered my face with my hands and sobbed silently, because in the palace, even your tears had to be quiet. I remember whispering into the darkness, God, why did you create me if I am only to disappoint? I had prayed all my life, but my prayers had become more like cries for survival, desperate attempts to reach a God who felt distant and unmoved. The palace staff, though obedient, were not immune to gossip. I overheard whispers as they cleaned the hallways or arranged flowers in the dining room. The third wife hasn't conceived yet. She's so young, why is it taking so long? Do you think the prince is displeased? What if she's barren? That word cut through me like a blade each time I heard it. Barren, empty, defective, a woman without purpose. As the months dragged on, the prince's behavior toward me shifted as well. He still treated me respectfully, but something in his eyes changed, a subtle disappointment, a hint of impatience. He asked fewer questions about my day. He spent less time in my quarters. I felt like a fading shadow, growing smaller and smaller in his world. One night, during a formal dinner, he announced that the royal physicians would intensify the fertility treatments. The words were spoken politely, almost clinically, but to me they felt like a public declaration that my worth was slipping. I lowered my gaze, nodded obediently, and felt a cold wave wash through my body. Little did I know that the palace's tightening grip was only the beginning. The storm was coming, darker and heavier than anything I could have imagined, and I was walking straight into it. It was during the second year of my marriage that the oppression stopped being subtle. The palace had ways of tightening its grip without ever raising its voice. The rules began to multiply, quiet rules, unwritten rules, rules enforced not by punishment but by pressure. I learned them one by one, like invisible threads weaving themselves around my wrists. One evening, I was summoned to the prince's private sitting room. The room was dim, lit only by a golden lamp that cast soft shadows on the carved walls. Prince Abdullah sat behind a low table, reading something I couldn't see. His expression was unreadable. When he finally looked up, his eyes lingered on me with an unusual heaviness. Amira, he said, the physicians have concerns. They believe you may not be following the regimen strictly enough. I blinked, stunned. I had done everything I had been told, every herb, every ritual, every examination. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words tangled on my tongue. Your Highness, I follow everything exactly. He studied me for a long moment, then sighed. I hope that is true, but understand that the honor of this family rests on each wife fulfilling her duty. Duty. That word hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. I bowed my head, murmured my obedience, and left the room with my heart pounding. After that conversation, the routines intensified. I was assigned new supervisors, women who monitored my meals, my medicines, my rest, my appearance. The palace physician began visiting every other day, examining me with the precision of a man searching not for solutions but for faults. Every time he finished, he would give me the same tight smile, the kind that hid disappointment behind professionalism. One morning, after yet another examination, he stepped back and said, "The prince is anxious. We must do everything possible." I felt his words drill into my chest. Everything possible. It sounded like a threat disguised as care. The pressure from the other wives grew harsher as well. Zahara became increasingly bold in her criticisms, no longer hiding her superiority behind sweet tones. "You must relax," she would say with false kindness. "Your stress is blocking your fertility," as if the problem was my emotions, as if my body was a rebellious child refusing to obey. Fatima, though kinder, began avoiding me. Perhaps she feared being associated with failure. There were days when I felt like a foreign object inside the palace, a misfired part of a system that operated smoothly without me. My footsteps echoed differently than theirs. My laughter, when it happened at all, felt out of place, too fragile for the marble floors. As months passed, with no sign of pregnancy, a new layer of pressure appeared: suspicion. The prince's advisors began visiting more frequently, asking questions disguised as polite conversation. "How are you feeling? Are you taking your herbs on time? Are you resting properly?" But beneath their smiles, I sensed an accusation forming. Maybe she is not trying hard enough. Even the servants' behavior shifted. Some avoided eye contact. Others watched me with a curiosity that bordered on pity. I overheard their whispers in the corridors. "The prince is losing patience. He spent less time in her quarters this week. Perhaps she will not last." One night, while I lay awake staring at the moonlight spilling across my bedroom floor, I realized something crushing. I was disappearing inside this palace. Not physically, I was still present, still participating in the rituals, but emotionally, spiritually, I was fading. It was as though the palace had pulled a thread loose inside me, and I was slowly unraveling. The turning point came on a warm afternoon in late autumn. I had just completed a prayer session with the religious instructor assigned to us. As I stepped into the courtyard for a moment of fresh air, Zahara approached me, her silk robes rustling softly. She carried a tray of dates, but her eyes were focused on me with an intensity that chilled my skin. "Amira," she began, "you must understand something." She offered me a date, though the gesture felt more symbolic than generous. In this palace, every woman is a pillar. If one pillar cracks, the whole structure trembles. Her smile sharpened. "You would not want to be the reason it falls." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I understand," I whispered. "I hope you do, because the prince has been patient. But patience has limits, and if you cannot fulfill your role, someone else will." She walked away before I could respond, leaving her words hanging in the air like a curse. I sank onto a stone bench, my hands trembling so violently that I had to clasp them together to steady myself. I wanted to scream, to cry, to run, but all I could do was sit there, suffocating under the weight of expectations I had never asked for. That night, I knelt on the prayer rug in my room and tried to pray. I whispered ancient words, phrases I had memorized since childhood, but they felt hollow on my tongue. For the first time in my life, I felt a terrifying thought rising inside me. What if God wasn't listening? What if I had done something unforgivable? What if he had abandoned me? My tears fell quietly, staining the fabric beneath me. "God," I whispered, voice cracking, "if you see me, please, please help me. I can't breathe in this life anymore." No answer came, only silence. And in that silence, the oppression grew heavier. The palace's expectations became chains wrapped around my ribs, tightening with every breath. I felt myself shrinking, fading, dissolving into a version of Amira I didn't recognize. I didn't know then that God had not abandoned me. I didn't know that beneath the silence, he was preparing to pull me out of a life that was killing me slowly. I didn't know that he was getting ready to break the palace's grip on me forever. I only knew that something inside me was breaking and that this breaking would soon expose a truth I had been running from. A truth that would change my life forever. Everything came to a breaking tension during the winter of my second year in the palace, when the cold outside seemed to seep into every corridor and every part of my heart. The palace heaters were warm enough, but the atmosphere felt icy, thick with suspicion and quiet hostility. There were days when I walked through the hallways and felt as though the walls themselves were whispering rumors. The pressure surrounding my empty womb became unbearable, and with every passing week, the scrutiny grew sharper. The royal physicians called for a new cycle of enhanced evaluations, a term that sounded clinical but felt deeply invasive. The first morning of those examinations, I sat on a metal table draped in crisp white fabric. The room smelled of antiseptic and something metallic I couldn't name. Bright lights illuminated every corner, leaving no room for shadows or dignity. The physician adjusted his glasses, glanced at my chart, and sighed as if my body had personally disappointed him. "We must explore every possibility," he said, his tone more directed at the nurses than at me. He spoke about my body as though I wasn't in the room, as though I couldn't hear the disappointment dripping from his words. I stared at the ceiling, counting the geometric tiles to keep myself from crying. When the examination was finally over, he scribbled notes, muttered to his assistants, and left without even offering a word of reassurance. It was as if my value had diminished with every page he flipped in my file. Walking back to my quarters afterward felt like walking through a tunnel. The hallway stretched endlessly before me, lined with polished floors that reflected my fragile image back at me. I could barely recognize myself anymore. My cheeks had grown hollow, my eyes dull. I looked like a woman fading, a woman shrinking into the spaces where no one would notice if she disappeared. When I reached my room, I closed the door, leaned my back against it, and slid to the floor. Tears spilled silently, soaking into my sleeves. I felt like I was dissolving from the inside, like every part of me was failing. My body, my purpose, my identity. Everything around me reinforced the message that I was not enough. As the weeks dragged on, the prince's demeanor changed as well. Our conversations became shorter, his visits less frequent. He no longer asked about my well-being or my comfort. Instead, he asked about test results, about cycles, about prognoses. I became less of a wife and more of a report he reviewed periodically with growing disappointment. One night, he arrived unexpectedly. I stood from my vanity table, startled by his presence. His expression was stern, his tone clipped. "Amira," he said, "the council believes we must take more serious measures. You will undergo a complete fertility assessment by the Royal Medical Board. Their findings will determine the next steps for your position here." The words made my heart sink. "My position?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. He paused, looking at me with a mix of frustration and finality. "Every wife has duties. You know this." When he left, my knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the carpet. The soft fabric absorbed my sobs, muffling the sound so no one would know that inside my chest, something was shattering. I cried until my throat burned, until the room blurred through my tears. I cried because I felt helpless, because the expectations placed on me were crushing me, because I no longer knew who I was without the possibility of motherhood. As the date for the Royal Board assessment approached, the palace atmosphere seemed to change dramatically. Servants walked faster when they passed me. Advisors whispered behind closed doors. The senior wives watched me with expressions I couldn't decipher, Zahara with sharp calculation, Fatima with quiet sadness. I felt like a defendant awaiting a trial whose verdict had already been written. The night before the evaluation, I couldn't sleep. The moonlight filtered through the window, casting pale shadows across the room. I sat curled at the edge of my bed, trembling with fear. My hands shook so violently that I had to clutch them together. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow. I whispered, "God, please don't let this be the end of me." But the silence that followed felt heavier than the room itself. When morning arrived, the palace guards escorted me to a hall I had never entered before, a clinical wing reserved only for the royal family's most important procedures. The air was cold, sterile. A long table stretched across the room, covered with documents, charts, and medical files, many of them mine. The board members entered, wearing white coats and unreadable expressions. They greeted the prince respectfully before turning their attention to me, their gazes scanning me like a puzzle they needed to solve. The head physician cleared his throat and began reciting my medical history. His voice was steady, emotionless, slicing through me with each word. The examinations that followed were more invasive than anything I had experienced before. I felt exposed, stripped of dignity, reduced to data. When they finished, I sat in a chair, trembling as the board deliberated quietly on the other side of the room. Their murmurs felt like thunder, each whisper a blow to my already fragile heart. Finally, the head physician turned toward the prince and spoke. "Your Highness," he said, "we have concluded that her reproductive functions show significant abnormalities. While further tests may clarify the extent of the issue, the likelihood of natural conception appears extremely low. Extremely low. Not impossible, not definitive, but low enough to be seen as failure." The prince's face tightened. Zahara and Fatima exchanged glances. I sat frozen, unable to breathe as the weight of their words crashed over me. I felt like a woman drowning in a room full of people who watched without trying to save me. Later that evening, as I walked back to my quarters, I realized something chilling. I was losing more than the prince's favor. I was losing my identity, my sense of self, the version of me I had always believed I was supposed to be. And I didn't know then that the oppression I felt the walls closing in on me was pushing me toward a truth that would soon explode into the open in the most devastating way. A truth that would lead to the moment my life fell apart, and the moment Jesus began to draw near. The day everything collapsed began like any other, which somehow made it more terrifying. Sometimes disaster announces itself with warnings, with storms gathering on the horizon, but sometimes it slips quietly into your life, hidden inside an ordinary sunrise, waiting for the moment to strike. That morning, the palace was unusually silent. Even the servants seemed to move more cautiously, as if they sensed that something fragile in the air was about to shatter. I had slept poorly the night before, my thoughts tangled in fear and dread. The results of the Royal Medical Board hung over me like a storm cloud. Extremely low likelihood of conception. Those words echoed through my skull, over and over, as if someone were hammering them into the walls of my mind. I kept thinking, if this is true, my life as I know it is already over. Somewhere deep inside, I felt a trembling awareness that everything was about to change, and not in a gentle way. Late that morning, a palace maid entered my room, her expression unusually stiff. She bowed and said, "The prince has requested your presence in the grand reception hall." A strange chill swept through me. That hall was rarely used except for official family meetings or for judgments. I swallowed hard and nodded, rising on shaky legs. My hands felt cold as I smoothed the fabric of my dress. I told myself to breathe, to walk steadily, but my steps felt heavier with each stride, as if the palace floor itself were resisting my movement. As I entered the hall, the air shifted. The room was vast, its marble floor shining like a mirror. Tall windows allowed sunlight to spill across the room, but even the sun seemed colder than usual. The prince sat on an ornate chair that resembled a throne. Zahara and Fatima stood to the side, their faces tense. Several religious scholars, including Sheikh Mohammed, were gathered behind the prince. The royal physicians stood off to the right with solemn expressions. My breath caught in my throat. I knelt immediately, as was protocol, my hands resting against the cold marble. Silence stretched across the hall like a blade. Finally, the prince spoke. His voice was calm, but beneath the surface I heard anger simmering like fire beneath ice. "Amira," he said, "the medical board has delivered their findings." He paused, letting the tension slice through the air. "They have concluded that your reproductive condition is not the result of temporary imbalance but inherent biological failure." Something inside me crumbled at those words. I lowered my gaze, blinking rapidly as tears threatened to spill. I wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but my voice refused to form. Before I could gather myself, the head physician stepped forward and spoke directly to the prince. Though loud enough for everyone to hear, "She has been barren since birth. There is no possibility of conception, not naturally nor through intervention." The words punched through me like a blow to the chest. My breath hitched as the full weight of the truth pressed down on me. I felt exposed, humiliated, completely stripped of the identity I'd been taught to build my life around. I whispered inwardly, God, is this really who I am? A woman who cannot give life? A woman without purpose? The prince rose from his seat, his expression darkening. You deceived me, he said, his voice echoing through the hall. You brought shame upon my house, my lineage, my name. His accusation shocked me. Your Highness, I managed to whisper, I did not know. But he cut me off with a sharp gesture. You hid your condition. You concealed your defect. You allowed me to believe you could fulfill your duties. Each word felt like a lash. Zahara watched with calm satisfaction. Fatima looked away, unable to meet my eyes. My heart hammered inside my chest, and my hands trembled against the cold floor. Sheikh Mohammed stepped forward then, holding a scroll of official documents. His face was stern, as though he had already judged me in his heart. In matters such as this, he declared, our sacred traditions are clear. A wife who deceives her husband concerning purity of lineage has committed a grave offense. Such deceit threatens the honor of the family and the righteousness of the bloodline. I felt dizzy, the room spinning slightly. The phrase grave offense echoed repeatedly in my mind, each time growing colder, heavier. I knew where this was heading, even before the words left his mouth. He continued, after consulting with the council and reviewing the evidence, the prescribed punishment is death. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. My breath stopped, my vision blurred. The marble floor beneath me felt suddenly colder, as if the temperature of the whole room had dropped. For several seconds, I couldn't think, couldn't breathe, couldn't process anything except the pounding of my heart. Death, not exile, not divorce, not disgrace. Death. A sound escaped me, a small, strangled whisper that barely resembled a voice. Please, please, Your Highness, I never intended. My plea dissolved in the air, unheard or ignored. The prince raised his hand to silence me. His expression was set, unwavering. You will have 30 days to prepare your soul. My soul, as if I still owned it, as if I hadn't lost it already long before this moment. The guard stepped forward to escort me away. My legs were shaking so violently that I could barely stand. As they took my arms, guiding me toward the door, one question screamed through my mind louder than all the others. God, if you are real, where are you now? And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I felt utterly abandoned. Yet I had no idea that this breaking, this complete collapse of everything I thought I was the very place where Jesus would one day meet me. The 30 days that followed were unlike anything I had ever known. People often imagine that facing death sharpens the senses, that it awakens something profound inside you. But for me, the early days felt like drifting in a fog, heavy, suffocating, unreal. It was as though my mind had detached itself to avoid breaking completely. I moved through time like a ghost inside my own body. The guards escorted me to a small, windowless room in the basement level of the palace, far from the laughter of servants, far from the beauty of the courtyards, far from life itself. The door locked behind me with a hollow thud that reverberated through my bones. Inside were only a narrow bed, a thin blanket, a wooden table, and a small prayer rug. They stripped me of all jewelry, all color, all reminders of my former life. I wore only plain white garments, shrouds that foreshadowed my end. On the first night, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall until my vision blurred. The silence was terrifying. Not peaceful, not restful, terrifying. Silence has a way of amplifying every fear you've ever swallowed. And I had swallowed many. During those early days, food was delivered quietly, always without eye contact. Even the guards seemed to treat me differently, not with cruelty, but with avoidance, as if looking at me too long might condemn them as well. I felt myself disappearing, shrinking into invisibility. The palace had many ways of killing a person long before the body actually died. Sheikh Mohammed visited regularly to prepare my soul. His presence always filled the small room with an air of stern finality. He would sit across from me, reciting verses with grave seriousness, reminding me of divine justice, repentance, and the importance of accepting my fate with humility. His words felt heavy, cold, like stones being placed one by one on my chest. One afternoon, he looked directly into my eyes and said, "Amira, this is the will of God. A righteous house must be protected. Your death will cleanse the dishonor." I swallowed hard, unable to respond. Every instinct inside me screamed that what he was saying wasn't right, that something about this interpretation of God felt twisted, yet I had no alternative image of God to cling to. Only silence. The nights were the worst. Darkness has a way of pulling fears to the surface like monsters rising from deep water. I lay awake for hours, listening to my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. Sometimes I cried quietly into my pillow so no one could hear. Sometimes I paced the room in restless circles, trying to outrun my thoughts. But mostly, I sat on the cold floor, knees pulled to my chest, whispering into the emptiness. "God, do you see me at all?" There were moments when despair swallowed me whole. I began questioning my worth, my purpose, my existence. I questioned every prayer I had ever prayed. I questioned whether God had ever listened, whether he had ever cared. I whispered, "Why did you create me only to destroy me?" And the silence that answered felt like confirmation that I was alone. By the third week, exhaustion seeped into my bones. My skin grew pale, my appetite vanished, and even breathing felt like a task. I stopped counting the days and started counting my regrets. Every moment I wished I had spoken up. Every time I had silenced my own heart to please someone else. Every part of myself I had given away without knowing there was another way to live. But it was on the 29th day, the night before my execution, when something inside me finally broke. I remember the moment with painful clarity. A guard had come to inform me that at sunrise, I would be taken to a remote location outside the city. He said it with the flat tone of a man delivering routine news. After he left, I sat alone in my room, my hands shaking uncontrollably. My breath came in shallow bursts as reality closed in on me like a tightening noose. I collapsed onto the floor, pressing my forehead against the cold marble, and sobbed with a kind of desperation I had never felt before. My whole body trembled. My tears soaked the rug beneath me. I was drowning in fear, grief, hopelessness. And from the depths of that agony, I whispered the most raw, honest prayer of my life. "God, if you are real, where are you? Why have you abandoned me? Why did you never love me?" The silence that followed was overwhelming. No voice, no comfort, no warm presence, just emptiness. But in that emptiness, something happened that I didn't understand at the time. Something deep inside me cracked open. A space inside my soul, one that had been sealed shut by years of duty, fear, and suffocation, finally split. I didn't know it then, but that split would become the doorway through which Jesus would one day enter. That night, I fell asleep on the cold floor with dried tears on my cheeks, certain that I would die the next morning. And part of me believed I deserved it. What I didn't know was that before the sun rose, a collision both earthly and heavenly would tear open the story of my life and reveal a grace I had never imagined existed. The morning of my execution began before sunrise, with the kind of silence that feels unnatural, almost holy in a way that unsettles the soul. I had barely slept. My body ached from lying on the cold floor, and my throat burned from crying through the night. When the guards opened the door, their faces expressionless, something in me felt strangely calm, not peaceful, but numb, like a candle whose flame had finally exhausted itself. I didn't fight. I didn't speak. I simply stood, letting them guide me as though I were sleepwalking through the final pages of my life. The sky outside was still dark when they placed me in the back of the black SUV. My wrists were not shackled. They didn't need to be. I had surrendered. Sheikh Mohammed sat beside me, reciting verses in a low, rhythmic tone. His voice blended with the gentle hum of the engine, creating a strange, hollow melody that felt disconnected from reality. I stared out the window, watching the city blur past empty streets, shuttered shops, the faint glow of streetlights flickering in the early hour. It felt like the world was holding its breath. My thoughts drifted between fear and resignation. Part of me whispered, "It will be over soon." Another part asked questions I was too afraid to voice. Is this really all I was meant for? Did I come into this world only to leave it unseen, unloved, unvalued? I remembered my childhood prayers, whispered under the stars on our rooftop garden. I remembered asking God to see me, to love me, to tell me who I was. And as the SUV drove deeper into the outskirts of the city, I wondered whether he had ever heard me at all. We approached a busy intersection as the sun began to rise, casting a soft glow across the buildings. For a brief moment, life around us moved. Normally, cars idled, people waited to cross, the world unaware of the condemned woman sitting behind tinted windows. I pressed my palm against the glass, watching a mother gently guide her child by the hand. Something inside me tightened painfully. I whispered silently, "God, if you are real, this is your last chance." And then everything exploded. A delivery truck came out of nowhere, barreling through the red light at full speed. It slammed into our SUV with a force that threw my body against the seat. The sound was deafening, metal screeching, glass shattering, screams swallowed by impact. Time warped, the world flipped. My vision blurred as the vehicle rolled, then rolled again, each crash sending shockwaves through my bones. When the SUV finally skidded to a stop against a concrete barrier, smoke rose from the crumpled hood, mingling with the sharp stench of gasoline. For a moment, I lay suspended upside down in the rear seat, my seatbelt cutting into my shoulder. My ears rang violently. My breath came in sharp, uneven gasps. Somewhere in the front, a guard groaned in pain. Sheikh Mohammed's head rested against the shattered window, blood trickling down his forehead. The scene was chaos, yet I felt an eerie clarity. I was alive. I blinked hard, trying to steady my vision. The back window behind me had shattered completely, leaving a jagged opening just large enough for someone to crawl through. My heartbeat thundered in my chest as I listened to distant voices outside, shouts, horns, someone calling for help. I didn't think, I didn't plan, I moved. My fingers fumbled with the seatbelt latch until it clicked open. I fell to the roof of the overturned car with a painful thud. My white execution garment snagged on shards of glass as I crawled toward the broken window. I felt the sting of cuts along my arms and legs, but adrenaline pushed me forward. With one last effort, I pulled myself through the opening and stumbled onto the street. For the first time in 30 days, the sky stretched above me without bars or ceilings. Cold morning air hit my face, sharp and invigorating. People were rushing toward the SUV, but in the confusion, no one noticed me, just a woman in torn white fabric, barefoot, trembling, partly covered in dust and blood. I took a step back, then another. My breaths came fast, shallow, but unstoppable, and then I ran. I don't fully remember the next 10 minutes, only fragmented images. My feet slapping against pavement, the burning in my lungs, the sound of sirens behind me, people turning their heads as I passed, confusion in their eyes. My body felt detached, moving purely by instinct, as though some invisible force had taken over and was urging me forward. By the time I slowed down, I was in a narrow residential street lined with old brick houses. My legs buckled beneath me. I collapsed in front of a small doorway, barely conscious. The world around me flickered like a dying flame. I was certain I would lose consciousness or be discovered at any moment. Then the door opened, and a woman middle-aged, with soft eyes and a face that radiated something I couldn't name, knelt beside me. She didn't scream, she didn't recoil, she didn't ask questions. She simply placed a gentle hand on my shoulder and said words I will never forget. "You're safe. Come inside, God sent you here." At the time, I didn't understand what she meant. I didn't know that Jesus had just stepped into my story for the first time. But that moment, those words were the first seed of his rescue. When I woke, I was surrounded by a quiet I didn't recognize. It wasn't the suffocating silence of my cell or the calculated hush of the palace. The silence felt different, warm, gentle, almost protective. I blinked slowly, my vision adjusting to the soft light filtering through sheer curtains. I was lying on a small sofa covered with a knitted blanket. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and something floral, maybe lavender. For a moment, I didn't know where I was, and a wave of panic surged through me. Then the woman appeared in the doorway. She carried a small bowl of water and a cloth. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back, and her eyes held a kindness I wasn't prepared for. She spoke gently. "You're awake. How are you feeling?" Her Arabic was fluent but carried a soft foreign accent. I opened my mouth to answer, but my voice cracked into a whisper, Where am I? You're in my home, she said, setting the bowl down beside me. My name is Sarah. You collapsed at my door. Collapsed. Yes. I remembered the moment my legs gave out, the way the ground rose up to meet me, the blur of fear and exhaustion. But what I didn't understand was why she had helped me, why she wasn't afraid, why she hadn't called the authorities the moment she saw me in torn execution robes. Why didn't you turn me away? I managed to ask, my hands trembling in my lap. Her smile was soft, almost motherly. Because God told me to bring you inside. Those words stunned me. I stared at her, trying to process what she meant. God told her? What kind of God spoke to people like that? My understanding of God had been shaped by duty, fear, and obligation. A God who instructed someone to open their door to a stranger, especially one who looked half dead, felt foreign to me. Sarah gently cleaned the cuts on my arms and forehead. Her touch was careful, respectful, nothing like the cold examinations in the palace. She didn't flinch at my blood or ask prying questions. She simply cared for me as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Over the next hours, she gave me clean clothes, warm soup, and a place to rest. I watched her move around the kitchen, humming softly, her presence filling the small home with a peace I didn't understand. Every act of kindness felt like a balm on wounds I had carried for years. We sat together at a small table as evening settled outside. The room glowed with the warm light of a single lamp. Finally, she asked, "Do you want to tell me what happened?" I hesitated. If I told her the truth, I risked everything, her safety, my own. But something inside me, something fragile and desperate for honesty, began to speak. I told her pieces, carefully at first. I said I was running for my life, that I couldn't return home, that people were looking for me. She didn't interrupt, didn't pry deeper than I offered. She simply listened, her eyes filled with compassion rather than curiosity. And then she said something I didn't expect. "You can stay here as long as you need. You're safe." Safe. A word I had not felt in years. My throat tightened as I whispered, "Why? You don't even know me." Sarah folded her hands gently. "Because Jesus loves you, and he brought you here." The name Jesus felt heavy, unfamiliar, forbidden. In my culture, we were taught to respect him as a prophet, but not to speak of him the way she did, like a friend, like a savior, like someone actively involved in her daily life. I felt a strange pull inside my chest, a curiosity mixed with fear. She must have sensed my apprehension because she spoke slowly, carefully. "Would you like to hear something that helped me when I was lost?" I nodded without thinking, drawn by something I couldn't describe. She opened a small book with worn pages. I recognized it immediately, though I had never held one before, a Bible. My breath caught. I stared at it as though it might burn me. I shouldn't, I whispered. "It's okay," she said softly. "You're safe here. No one will know." She turned to a passage and read aloud. It was simple, gentle, nothing like the harsh religious warnings I had grown up with. "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." The words washed over me like warm water. My heart tightened painfully. Rest, a word I had never truly known. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. Sarah closed the book and rested her hand over mine. "Jesus sees you, Amira. He knows your pain. He hasn't forgotten you." I felt tears prick my eyes. Why would he care about me? She didn't hesitate. "Because he loves you. Not for what you can give, not for what you can produce, not for what others expect from you. Just you." Her words pierced me in a place I didn't know existed. I tried to speak, but my voice broke into tears I couldn't stop. Years of pressure, humiliation, fear, and loneliness rushed out of me like a dam collapsing. Sarah didn't judge me. She didn't try to stop my sobs. She simply held me the way a mother might hold a child who has been hurting for far too long. That night, as I lay on her sofa wrapped in the knitted blanket, I whispered into the darkness, "Jesus, if you truly see me, show me." It was the first time I had ever spoken his name in a prayer, and though I didn't yet know it, he had already begun answering. In the days that followed, Sarah's home became a sanctuary, fragile, hidden, temporary, but more comforting than any palace room I had ever known. For the first time in my life, no one measured my worth. No one watched my every movement. No one demanded anything from me. Yet even in that safety, my heart remained unsettled. Trauma does not loosen its grip easily. Every distant police siren made me flinch. Every knock at the door made my pulse race. Some nights, I woke drenched in sweat, convinced guards were standing over me. I lived in a paradox, physically safe, spiritually broken. Sarah never pressured me to talk, but somehow her presence made silence feel less suffocating. She shared small things about her daily life, her work helping refugee women, her quiet routines. Her gentleness softened parts of me I didn't know existed. Still, there was an emptiness inside me that nothing seemed to fill. I tried to bury it, to busy myself with chores around the house, but the pain always resurfaced the moment I stopped moving. One evening, while Sarah prepared dinner, I sat quietly at the kitchen table. The sun had begun to set, painting the window with hues of amber and rose. I watched dust particles float in the warm air. Something about the moment felt strangely suspended, like time was holding its breath again. Sarah hummed softly as she chopped vegetables, a melody I didn't recognize. After a while, she glanced over her shoulder and said, "How is your heart today?" The question disarmed me. No one had ever asked about my heart, my body, my duties, my behavior, yes. But my heart, I swallowed. "I don't know," I admitted. My voice felt small, fragile. "I'm safe, but I'm not free. I keep remembering everything. I keep hearing everything they said. I keep seeing my words choked into silence." Sarah set down her knife and turned to face me fully. "Healing is not the absence of memories," she said gently. "It's the presence of someone stronger within them." She motioned to the Bible resting on the counter. "Have you read more?" I shook my head. Fear, curiosity, and longing battled inside me. "I don't know how to approach it. I feel like I'm doing something forbidden." She smiled softly. "Truth can never be forbidden, Amira, only hidden." She walked over, placed the Bible gently in front of me. I traced my fingers over the cover, feeling its worn texture. "Where do I start?" I asked. "Ask God to guide you," she said. "He will." That night, after dinner, I returned to the living room while Sarah washed dishes. I sat curled on the sofa, the Bible heavy in my lap. I opened it randomly, afraid and yet drawn to it at the same time. My eyes landed on a passage in Psalms. I whispered the words softly, stumbling through them like a child learning to speak. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." My breath caught. Something warm stirred in my chest, small, like the flicker of a candle. I read it again, slower, brokenhearted, crushed in spirit. It felt like the verse had been written for the exact version of me sitting on that sofa in torn, borrowed clothes with my life in ruins. Tears filled my eyes. "God, is this you?" I whispered. "Are you speaking to me?" That night, I lay awake long after Sarah had gone to bed. My heart felt strange, tender, awakened, as if someone had touched a wound I had long accepted as permanent. I watched the shadows dance across the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant barking of a stray dog, the soft breeze brushing the curtains. Everything felt heightened, but it was the next night when everything changed. I had trouble sleeping again. I lay on the sofa staring at the window, where the moon cast a silver glow across the floor. The silence felt different this time, not heavy, not suffocating, but expectant, like the air before rain. At some point, I sat up, restless. My heart throbbed with a pressure I couldn't explain. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anxiety. It was something deeper, something ancient, something pulling me from the inside out. I placed a hand over my chest, whispering, "God, if you're real, please, I need you." The room grew still, unnaturally still. The air shifted, thickened, yet warmed. My breath trembled. Something in the atmosphere changed in a way I could neither see nor touch, but I felt it instantly, undeniably, like a presence entering the room. A soft light began to form in the corner near the window, not harsh, not blinding, but gentle, alive, golden. My breath froze. I blinked hard, thinking it was my imagination, but the light grew brighter. My heart pounded as the presence moved, not with footsteps, but with a sense of nearness so real it felt like the space around me had shifted to make room for him. Then I heard it, a voice not audible to my ears, but unmistakable inside my spirit. It was like sound woven with love, strength, tenderness, and authority all at once. A voice that felt both foreign and familiar, as if I had known it long before I was born. Amira, my name, spoken with a love I had never known, spoken like a truth I had forgotten. I gasped, tears bursting from my eyes. My hands flew to my mouth as I sobbed uncontrollably, not from fear, but from recognition. My soul knew him before my mind did. The light brightened again, soft and warm, enveloping me like a blanket. The presence radiated peace, not the fragile peace of safety, but a peace that confronted every wound, every lie, every fear. And in that overwhelming love, I understood. Jesus had come to meet me. The moment his voice spoke my name, something inside me tore open like a curtain being pulled back to reveal a world I had been blind to my entire life. I could no longer see the room the way it had been. The sofa, the curtains, the small lamp, they all faded into the background as the light in the corner grew brighter, warmer, alive with a presence that filled every corner of my soul. I didn't see a face at first. I didn't see a figure. I simply felt him, felt his nearness like a heartbeat against my own. The air trembled with an energy I cannot compare to anything earthly. It was as though heaven itself had bent low to the floor where I knelt trembling. My tears wouldn't stop. They streamed down my cheeks as I shook uncontrollably. I had known fear before, paralyzing fear, suffocating fear, but this was something entirely different. This was awe. This was recognition. This was love so pure that it felt like fire, burning away every lie I had ever believed about myself. The light shifted slightly, and slowly, gently, the outline of a figure emerged within it, tall, radiant, clothed in a brilliance that did not blind but healed. I could not see every detail, yet I knew with absolute certainty who stood before me. Jesus, the one Sarah had spoken of, the one whose words had pierced my heart days before, the one I had whispered to in desperation. He was here. His presence filled the room until I felt I could hardly breathe. My body wanted to fall flat on the floor, yet something about his presence lifted me rather than crushed me. It was overwhelming but not oppressive. It was powerful but tender. It was holy yet inviting. Then he spoke again. Amira, I have always been with you. His voice vibrated through my entire being, not like sound, but like truth itself. I sobbed harder, covering my face with my hands. Why? I cried. Why would you come to me? I'm nothing. I'm broken. I'm ashamed. Before I could finish, something like a wave of warmth washed over me, silencing my words, quieting the shaking in my chest. You are mine, he whispered, words so gentle, yet carrying the weight of eternity. You were never forgotten. You were never invisible. I have loved you since before you were formed. My breath shattered into 1,000 pieces. No one had ever spoken of me like that. Not my family, not my husband, not even my own thoughts. I had lived my entire life believing love was something to earn, to prove, to fight for. But he spoke of love as something freely given, not because I was valuable, but making me valuable by loving me. He stepped closer, the light surrounding him expanding. I felt it wrap around me like the warmest embrace. Every wound in my heart began to throb, not with pain, but with a strange sense that healing was beginning. You were not created to be property, he said. You are not a burden. You are not a disappointment. Your worth is not in your womb, but in your soul. A sob tore from my chest. All the voices from my past, the teachings, the expectations, the judgments, they clashed violently in my mind, then broke apart like shattered glass. I felt them falling away, piece by piece, under the weight of his words. I whispered through tears, but why didn't you stop the suffering? Why did you let me go through so much pain? The light dimmed slightly, not in power, but in gentleness, as though he were drawing near enough to touch the deepest part of my heart. I was with you in every moment, he said softly. When you cried alone in the palace, I was there. When you were condemned unjustly, I stood beside you. When you prayed with your last breath, I listened. The world wounded you, but I did not abandon you. I waited for your heart to call me. I covered my mouth. overwhelmed. His love was not distant. It was intimate, closer than breath, deeper than grief, stronger than fear. In that moment, I understood something profound. He had not shown up because I was worthy. He had shown up because he is love. He extended his hand toward me, not physically, yet unmistakably. The gesture stirred something inside me, something alive and trembling. I whispered, "I don't know how to come to you." "You already have," he said. "Your heart cried out," and I answered. The warmth around me intensified, and with it came a peace unlike anything I had known. Not the fragile peace of quiet places, but a peace that filled me from the inside, touching wounds I had buried so deep I had forgotten they existed. Then his voice became softer, almost a whisper carried on light. "Amira, let me heal you." I nodded through tears. "Please," I whispered. "I need you." As soon as the words left my lips, the light enveloped me fully. Every fear, every trauma, every moment of abandonment seemed to melt away like ice under the sun. I felt myself collapse, not from weakness, but from surrender. My body folded to the floor, and I sobbed not in despair but in release. He spoke one final sentence before the vision faded. "You are my beloved, and I will make you new." The light slowly dimmed, though the warmth remained long after. His form faded from sight. When I finally lifted my head, I realized I was not the same woman who had knelt trembling minutes before. Something in me had been rewritten, reborn, awakened. Jesus had met me in my hiding place. And for the first time in my entire life, I knew I was loved. For a long time after the light faded, I remained on the floor, my palms pressed against the wood as though grounding myself between two worlds, the world I had known and the world I had just tasted for the first time. My body trembled, not from fear anymore, but from an overwhelming sense of relief, like something heavy inside me had broken apart to make space for breath, for life, for him. I wiped my tears slowly, my chest rising and falling in uneven rhythms. The room was quiet again, but it was not the suffocating quiet that had once haunted me. It was a sacred quiet, the kind that follows a miracle. Even the air felt different, as if it had been cleansed. My skin still tingled from the warmth of his presence, and my heart felt strangely weightless, as if all the burdens I had carried for years had been lifted off piece by piece. I didn't know how long I sat there. It could have been 5 minutes or an hour. Time no longer moved the same way. My mind kept replaying his words, each one settling into the deepest cracks of my soul like gentle rain falling on dry earth. "You are mine. You are never forgotten. You are my beloved." I placed a hand over my chest, and for the first time in my life, I felt the steady beat of a heart that belonged to someone who loved me not because of what I could give, but because of who he created me to be. Eventually, I stood, using the back of the sofa for support. My legs were weak, unsteady, as though learning to walk again. The moonlight still streamed through the window, illuminating the room in a soft, silver glow. I pressed my palm against the glass, whispering, "Jesus, thank you." My voice cracked, but not from grief, from awe. A quiet sound came from the hallway footsteps, gentle ones. Sarah appeared at the doorway, rubbing her eyes, her hair slightly disheveled. She must have sensed something, or perhaps the presence of God had stirred her awake. Her gaze fell on me, and instantly, her expression softened. "Amira?" she said softly. "Are you all right?" At first, I couldn't speak. Emotions swelled in my throat. My lips trembled as I forced myself to nod. He was here," I whispered. The words felt almost unreal to speak aloud. "Sarah, Jesus was here." She took a slow breath, her eyes glistening. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look confused. She looked grateful, as if she had been praying for this very moment. She stepped closer and placed her hands gently on my shoulders. "Tell me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I told her everything, the light, the voice, the warmth, the overwhelming love. Every detail poured out of me like water breaking through a dam. Sarah listened without interrupting, tears slipping down her cheeks as she nodded with the tender understanding of someone who knew exactly what I had experienced. When I finally finished, she whispered, "He came to you because he loves you more than you can imagine, and because you finally let him in." Those words wrapped around my heart like a comforting blanket. I hadn't realized it until she said it, but it was true. For the first time in my life, I had let someone divine, someone truly see me. Sarah guided me to sit on the sofa, then knelt beside me. Amira, do you want to give your life to him? Not just your fear, not just your pain, but everything? Do you want to belong to Jesus? My breath caught. The question wasn't harsh or urgent. It was gentle, invitational, filled with tender reverence. I felt that same warmth stir inside me again, the same pull I had felt when Jesus spoke my name. Yes, I whispered. More than anything. Sarah smiled, a smile that radiated both joy and relief. She took my hands in hers. Then pray with me, she said. Her words guided me, but the surrender came from the deepest part of my being. Jesus, I believe you came for me. I believe you love me. I give you my heart, my life, my future, my brokenness, everything. Make me yours. Make me new. As I prayed, the warmth surged through me again, embracing me from within. It wasn't dramatic this time, not like the brilliance of moments earlier. It was quiet, steady, like a seed being planted in the deepest soil of my soul. When I opened my eyes, I felt different. Not perfect, not fully healed, but alive. Alive in a way I had never known. Hope not the fragile, wishful kind, but a strong, living hope took root inside me. A hope anchored not in circumstances, not in acceptance from others, but in a savior who had met me in a hidden room when I had nothing left. Sarah squeezed my hands gently. Welcome to his family, Amira. I smiled, a real, unforced smile that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds that had hung over me for years. I feel free, I whispered. And I did. For the first time since childhood, I felt free. Not because my circumstances had changed, they hadn't. I was still a fugitive, still hunted, still wounded, still uncertain of tomorrow. But Jesus had stepped into my story. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. In the days that followed my encounter with Jesus, everything inside me felt transformed, yet everything around me remained dangerously the same. My heart had been washed, healed, awakened, but my circumstances were still a tangled web of danger. At any moment, someone could recognize me. At any moment, the authorities could knock on Sarah's door. At any moment, the life Jesus had just breathed into me could be cut short by the life I had fled. Yet, for the first time, I did not live in terror. Fear still whispered at my edges, but it no longer ruled me. There was a deeper voice now, steady and strong, whispering, I am with you. I clung to that voice like a lifeline. Sarah and I spent hours praying together, reading scripture, and talking about what God might be doing in my life. She helped me understand that Jesus didn't rescue people halfway, he rescued them fully, both spirit and flesh. If he saved your soul, she said one evening, he will not abandon your life. Still, I felt trapped in a fragile reality. I knew I couldn't remain in her house forever. Riyadh was filled with eyes, neighbors, police, palace informants. One glimpse of my face and everything would unravel. Sarah knew it too. Every time someone passed near her door, her shoulders tensed slightly, though she always tried to hide it. One afternoon, after we finished praying, she sat across from me with a thoughtful expression. There is something I need to tell you, she said gently. I felt my stomach tighten. What is it? There's a network, she said. A group of believers who help women escape situations like yours. They're careful, secretive, and they have helped many disappear safely. My heart skipped a beat. The idea of leaving the country seemed impossible, almost fantastical. Escape? I whispered. To where? She hesitated. Anywhere. God opens a door. Some go to Jordan, some to Turkey. Some make it farther to Europe or Canada. She leaned forward. But it is dangerous. Very dangerous. Dangerous. The word hovered in the air, but for the first time, it didn't suffocate me. Jesus had already stepped into my death sentence once. Couldn't he do it again? Sarah continued, I haven't contacted them yet. I wanted to wait until you were ready. Her eyes softened. Are you ready, Amira? To leave everything behind? I looked down at my hands, hands that had once worn jewels, hands that had been trained to serve a life that never belonged to me. hands that Jesus had touched with his healing presence. Slowly, I nodded. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I'm ready to live." That night, while I rested in the living room with the Bible open on my lap, Sarah made the call. I couldn't hear the words, only her subdued tone, the occasional whispered, "Yes, I understand," and the way she pressed a hand over her chest as if steadying her heart. When she hung up, she exhaled a long, shaky breath. "They will come in 3 days," she said quietly. "At dawn, you must be ready to leave immediately. 3 days, 3 days to prepare for a new life. 3 days before stepping into the unknown." I felt a mixture of anticipation and fear of capture, fear of failure, fear of the dangerous journey ahead. But beneath it all was an unshakable peace I couldn't explain. Jesus had found me. Jesus had loved me. Jesus had spoken to me. Why would he bring me this far only to abandon me now? That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the moon glow softly over the quiet neighborhood. "Jesus," I whispered, "please guide every step." The air felt warm around me as though his presence lingered in the room, assuring me I wasn't alone. The next day, Sarah warned me to stay away from windows and avoid any noise that might draw attention. We cleaned the house carefully, removed any trace of my presence in case someone came unexpectedly. She helped me discard the torn execution robe and gave me simple clothes that wouldn't draw attention. But something happened on the second night, something neither of us expected. We heard footsteps outside. Slow, heavy, deliberate. My heart froze. Sarah's face went pale. She motioned for me to hide behind the kitchen counter while she cautiously approached the door. She didn't open it, just peeked through the small peephole. What I saw next sent a tremor through my entire body. A black government vehicle was parked in the street. 2 men stood beside it. One of them, tall, stern-faced, was someone I recognized instantly. He was one of the palace security officers. My blood ran cold. I pressed both hands against my mouth to keep from screaming. Sarah stepped back from the door, her breath uneven. She whispered, "They're searching the neighborhood." My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. My knees buckled. "Jesus," I whispered, "please, don't let them find me." For the next hour, we stood in absolute silence. The footsteps came closer, then faded, then returned again. The officers spoke quietly, scanning houses, checking corners, watching windows. They were hunting me. Every moment felt like a lifetime. I didn't dare breathe too deeply. My entire body trembled as memories from the palace flooded back the sentence, the humiliation, the cold pronouncement of death. The guards were not here to arrest me. They were here to finish what the execution truck couldn't. I felt tears gathering in my eyes. But this time, they weren't tears of fear, they were tears of pleading. "Jesus, you saved me once. Please save me again." At that moment, something inexplicable happened. The streetlights flickered. Once, twice, then went completely dark. The entire block plunged into shadow. Sarah gasped softly. "The electricity never cuts here," she whispered, but I felt it. A warmth, a presence, a quiet assurance blooming in my chest. Jesus was here. The officers muttered in confusion. Their flashlights clicked on, scanning the shadows, but strangely, miraculously, they never pointed toward our house. Even when they passed directly in front of it, they turned away at the last moment, as though something unseen guided their eyes elsewhere. After several long minutes, the engine of the vehicle revved, and they drove away. I collapsed onto my knees, breathless, overwhelmed. Jesus had hidden me. Again, after the black vehicle disappeared into the distance, the silence that settled over the street felt unreal thick, humming, charged with the kind of stillness that follows a divine intervention. I remained on my knees, trembling, my breath ragged. Sarah knelt beside me, her hand resting gently on my back. Neither of us spoke for several long moments. We simply breathed in the miracle. Finally, she whispered, "Jesus covered this house with his hand." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. I felt him. I knew they wouldn't see us. But even as we clung to gratitude, fear pulsed beneath the surface. The search meant one thing. The palace had survived the crash, realized I was gone, and activated a manhunt. I wasn't forgotten. I wasn't presumed dead. They were looking for me, and they were close. Too close. Sarah rose to her feet first. "We need to prepare," she said firmly. The fear in her voice didn't overshadow the determination. "If they return, we must be gone." Sleep was impossible that night. We packed what little I could carry: a change of clothes, a small bottle of water, a scarf, and Sarah's old phone with no SIM card, only Wi-Fi functionality. She handed me something else too, her worn Bible. "I can't," I said, pushing it back gently. "This is yours, you need it." She shook her head. "Jesus told me to give it to you. It's yours now." I pressed the book to my chest, feeling its weight, soft but mighty. The very words inside had split open my soul days earlier. Now they were my lifeline. The following morning came quietly. Too quietly. A hush spread across the neighborhood, as though the whole block sensed the presence of danger lingering like smoke after a fire. Sarah and I stayed hidden most of the day, waiting for the network's next instructions. Every shadow outside made us tense. Every car passing sent my pulse racing. Late afternoon, her phone buzzed. She read the message with knitted brows, then looked up at me. "It's time." My heart pounded. "Tonight?" "Yes, after midnight, someone will pick you up." I swallowed hard. Tonight, everything in my life had always felt controlled, scheduled by others, but now, for the first time, the urgency came from God, not fear. And yet fear was still there, tangled with hope, tangled with the unknown. We prayed together for hours, short prayers, long prayers, silent prayers. At one point, I broke down, my hands shaking uncontrollably. "Sarah, what if something goes wrong? What if they find me? What if—" She placed both hands on my cheeks and looked straight into my eyes. "Amira, the same Jesus who appeared to you, the same Jesus who hid you last night, he is the one leading you out. Do you think he will let your enemies catch you before his purpose is complete?" Her words steadied me. Jesus was not done writing my story. Midnight approached slowly, each second heavy like a heartbeat. We sat by the window with the lights off, watching the empty street. My bag rested on my lap, my scarf covered my hair. My heart pounded so loudly I wondered if Sarah could hear it. Then we saw it, a white sedan with no markings, rolling to a gentle stop outside her house. My stomach tightened. Is that them? Sarah reached for her phone. A single message flashed. "They're here." She squeezed my hand. "Go. Jesus is with you. You are not running toward fear, you are running toward life." Tears blurred my vision. "I'll never be able to repay you." She hugged me tightly. "Just live. Just shine his light. That is more than enough." I pulled the hood of my jacket over my head and slipped out through the back door, moving through the narrow alley between houses. My breath caught as I rounded the corner. The car's rear door opened quietly. A man stepped out middle-aged, with dark eyes and a gentle expression. He nodded once. "Amir?" My voice was barely a whisper. "Yes. Hurry. We must leave before patrol cars pass again." I climbed into the back seat. Another woman sat beside me, covered, silent, trembling. I recognized the look in her eyes instantly. A fugitive like me. A woman who had fled danger. A woman who Jesus had led into this vehicle at the exact same time. The sedan pulled away from the curb slowly at first, then gained speed as we turned onto the main road. I kept my head low, heart pounding with every street we passed. The man driving spoke in a calm, low voice. "There will be checkpoints on the major roads. We will use side streets. Jesus willing, we will reach the safe house before dawn." My pulse quickened. Checkpoints meant guards. Guards meant danger. Danger meant death. But something unexpected happened. At every intersection where a police car should have been, there was none. At every street where patrols normally passed, they were absent. Twice we saw a vehicle in the distance, but it turned away before we got close. The driver shook his head in disbelief. "This is not normal. They're everywhere tonight except here." A shiver ran down my spine. Jesus was clearing the path. 2 hours later, we approached the outskirts of the city. The sky was beginning to lighten with the first hint of dawn. "We're almost there," the driver said. "Once we reach the safe house, you'll rest for one night before the next part of the plan." The next part. Another step. Another unknown. But for the first time, the unknown didn't terrify me. It felt like an invitation. As we drove through the final stretch of road, I pressed my forehead against the cool window and whispered into the soft glow of morning, "Jesus, thank you. Lead me." And deep inside, I felt his voice, not loud, not dramatic, but steady. "I am making a way." We reached the safe house just before the first streaks of dawn touched the horizon. It was a small, abandoned building on the edge of a rural village, simple, weather-worn, silent. The driver parked the sedan behind a cluster of palm trees, where it would remain unseen from the road. He motioned for us to move quickly. My legs were numb from fear and exhaustion, but determination carried me forward. Inside, the safe house smelled of dust and old stone. Thin mattresses lay on the floor. A single lantern flickered on a crate. The woman who had ridden beside me sank onto one of the mattresses and burst into terrified sobs. I wanted to comfort her, but my own emotions were trembling too violently to control. The driver knelt beside her, praying softly in Arabic, asking Jesus to cover us with his wings. When he finished, he turned to me. "You should rest," he said. "Tonight, we travel to the border." My breath caught. "Tonight?" "Yes. Once the sun rises fully, the city will tighten security. We must leave while darkness still hides us." While he spoke, I suddenly felt something shift in my spirit like a tug, a whisper, a warning carried on unseen wind. I placed a hand over my chest. "We are not safe here for long," I said quietly. He nodded. "I feel the same." We rested in turns. When I closed my eyes, exhaustion pulled me under instantly. But even in sleep, I dreamed of Jesus, his light, his voice, the warmth of his presence. Each dream felt like a reassurance. "I am leading you. Do not fear." Late that evening, the driver woke us. "It's time." His voice was low, steady, serious. The night air was cool and still when we stepped outside. The sedan had been moved. Instead, a small cargo truck waited, its back door open. "No checkpoints will stop a produce truck," he said. "We'll cover you with crates." My pulse quickened, buried alive beneath crates, in darkness. Without knowing what roads we would take, everything about it should have terrified me. And yet, strangely, I felt safer there than in the palace, safer than in Sarah's house, safer than anywhere I had been since childhood. Jesus was guiding each step. We climbed into the back, and the driver covered us with empty wooden crates, leaving small spaces for air. The door shut. Darkness swallowed everything. I heard the latch lock. The engine rumbled to life. We moved. Every bump in the road made my heartbeat thud harder. Every slow turn felt like a confrontation with danger. The woman beside me whispered prayers, broken and trembling. I held her hand. "Jesus is here," I whispered. "He will not leave us." An hour passed. 2, 3. The cramped space made my joints ache, but I dared not shift. At one point, I heard voices outside, the unmistakable sound of soldiers. My breath froze. The truck slowed, then it stopped. Boots crunched gravel. Someone knocked hard on the side of the truck. "Open it!" a voice barked. The driver obeyed. The door creaked open. Flashlights swept across the crates. I squeezed my eyes shut and mouthed, "Jesus, please hide us." The crate above me rattled as a soldier lifted it. I felt cold air rush onto my face. The flashlight beam passed inches from my cheek through the slats of the crate. The soldier grunted. "Just produce," he muttered. "Move along." He slammed the crate down. The truck door shut. The engine roared again. And we moved. The woman beside me began to cry silently. I did too, relief, disbelief, gratitude, awe, all tangled together. Jesus had shielded us once again. Hours later, the terrain changed. The air grew colder. The bumps became rougher. The truck slowed. Finally, the driver opened the back door. "We walk from here," he whispered urgently. "The border is close." The woman and I climbed down. Night stretched endless across the desert, the sky glowing with starlight. In the distance, faint lights flickered another country, another life, another chance. But between us and that border was open desert patrolled by guards. "We must cross through the rocks," the driver said. "Stay low, stay silent." We moved like shadows, careful, slow, guided by moonlight and prayer. At one point, We dropped flat on the ground as a patrol jeep passed, headlights cutting across the sand. My heart hammered so violently I thought they would hear it, but the jeep turned away. We continued. Halfway through the desert, my legs began to shake, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Days of running, nights without sleep, the weight of trauma pressing against my ribs, it all collided at once. I stumbled. "Amira," the driver whispered sharply. "You must keep moving." But my knees buckled. I collapsed into the sand, breathless. I can't. I gasped. The woman knelt beside me, gripping my arm. "Please, sister, get up, please." I tried. My arms trembled. My legs refused. And then something happened. A wind stirred, though the desert had been still moments earlier. Soft at first, then stronger. Not cold, warm, then light. Not bright like the encounter in Sarah's house. Not blinding, but gentle. Like moonlight coming alive, wrapping itself around me. I felt it inside me more than on my skin. His voice followed. "Amira, I am here." Not loud, not dramatic, but steady, like breath, like truth. Strength surged through my limbs, warm, powerful, alive. My trembling faded, my breath steadied, my vision sharpened as though painted with clarity. I rose slowly to my feet. The driver and the woman stared, wide-eyed, unsure of what they were witnessing. "I'm all right," I whispered. "Let's go." And we went. The last stretch of the desert felt almost unreal. My body moved as though carried. We reached the border fence, where a small gap had been cut. The driver motioned us through. On the other side, a man waited with a van. He opened the door and smiled. "Welcome," he whispered. "You're safe now." As the van pulled away from the border, tears streamed down my face. I pressed Sarah's Bible to my chest. In my heart, Jesus whispered, "What others call coincidence, you will know as my hand." He had led me out of death. He had guided every step. He had opened every door. And for the first time in my life, I was truly free. Crossing that border was like crossing from death into life. The moment the van carried us deeper into the next country, I felt something inside me unravel, a knot of fear that had lived in my chest for years. It loosened slowly, painfully, beautifully. Outside the window, the landscape blurred past in soft shades of gray and dawn gold. And for the first time, I allowed myself to breathe fully. Not cautiously, not fearfully, but freely. The man who drove the van offered us water and blankets. His kindness reminded me of Sarah's gentle, patient, filled with a quiet reverence. "You are safe now," he said with a soft smile. But safety was a foreign concept to me. I didn't know how to receive it yet. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting danger to reappear. Yet each time, the only thing behind me was the fading shadow of a life I no longer belonged to. We arrived at a hidden safe center run by believers, a small house tucked between olive trees with a quiet yard where birds sang fearlessly. Inside, an elderly woman greeted us, embracing me with the tenderness of a mother welcoming a long-lost child. "Jesus brought you home," she whispered. Her words pierced me in the gentlest way. Over the next days, my body finally rested. Deep, dreamless sleep overtook me, as though my soul needed to recover from years of running, hiding, suffocating. When I woke, sunlight filtered through a simple lace curtain, painting soft patterns across the room. The air smelled of warm bread and herbs. For the first time in my life, my waking breath wasn't filled with dread. I spent hours sitting under the olive trees outside, Sarah's Bible open on my lap. I read slowly, letting every verse sink like water into cracked soil. The words of Jesus felt alive, loving, fierce, tender, powerful. I found myself crying often, not from pain, but from the realization that the God I had feared all my life was nothing like the one speaking to me in those pages. One afternoon, as I read the passage where Jesus says, "I came that they may have life and have it abundantly," something inside me broke open again. Life, abundant life, not survival, not obedience to roles that crushed me, not fear disguised as duty. Life, a life where I mattered, a life where I was loved. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Jesus, is this what you rescued me for?" His answer came softly, not in a vision this time, but in the quiet conviction that settled deep in my chest. Yes, I rescued you to live. I pressed my forehead against the pages of the Bible and wept. In that safe house, the believers helped us obtain travel documents and refugee support. They worked with organizations that specialized in rescuing persecuted women, helping them start new lives far from danger. Every step they took felt like watching Jesus move through human hands quietly, faithfully, with purpose. Soon, I was placed on a flight to Canada. I had never flown alone before. As the plane lifted off the runway, climbing into the clouds, I looked down at the land I once called home, the palaces, the walls, the places where I had lost so much. Instead of bitterness, I felt gratitude. Gratitude that Jesus had found me there. Gratitude that he had shattered the chains I once thought were unbreakable. Landing in Canada was like stepping into another universe. Cold air kissed my face. Snowflakes danced on my lashes. People hurried through the airport, wrapped in winter coats, laughing, talking freely, their eyes unburdened by fear. I watched them with wonder. Could I ever live that freely? I didn't know the answer yet, but I knew Jesus would teach me. A local Christian community welcomed me with open arms. They helped me learn English, navigate paperwork, understand the culture. They gave me a small room in a shared home for women recovering from trauma. The first night, lying under a warm blanket, listening to the soft hum of the heater, I whispered, "Jesus, I feel like a child again. Please teach me how to live." He did, slowly, tenderly. He taught me how to shop for groceries without fear, how to ride buses without scanning for threats, how to sleep without nightmares, how to speak without trembling. Every day became a lesson in freedom, a freedom I never knew existed. Months passed, and my heart began to heal in places I once believed were permanently damaged. I started attending a local church where worship felt like stepping into a river of peace. I would stand among strangers, with tears streaming down my face as the words, "I am a child of God," echoed through the sanctuary. For the first time, I believed it. One evening, while journaling by the window of my small room, I realized something profound. I was no longer running. I was no longer hiding. I was no longer defined by my past, my title, or my infertility. I was defined by Jesus, a savior who meets women in their darkest night, a savior who rescues the unseen, a savior who rewrites stories with his love. And as I stared at the snowy streets below, a new question began to burn inside me, a question that would eventually shape the rest of my life. "Jesus, what do you want to do with my story?" His answer would come soon, and it would change everything. The answer to my question came unexpectedly. Months after settling into my new life in Canada, I had been attending a small women's support group at church, a circle of women from different nations, each carrying stories of pain, loss, and survival. One evening, after listening to a young woman from East Africa share about escaping an abusive marriage, something ignited inside my chest. Her trembling voice, her hidden sorrow, her longing for identity, it was like looking into a mirror of my former self. I went home that night unable to sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling as memories of my own journey flooded back. The palace walls, the cold pronouncement of death, the crash, Sarah's compassion, the supernatural encounter with Jesus, the desert escape. Not as trauma this time, but as testimony, as evidence of a God who intervenes, rescues, restores. And then the whisper came. Not dramatic, not loud, but clear. "Tell your story and help my daughters find freedom." I sat up slowly, my heart pounding not in fear, but in recognition. I felt the same stirring I had felt the night Jesus appeared to me, a gentle but unmistakable calling. The next morning, I shared it with my pastor, who smiled warmly and said, "Amira, God never wastes a story. Your wounds are becoming wells of living water." That year, with the help of the church and local ministries, I founded Daughters of Hope, a network dedicated to providing safe housing, emotional support, and spiritual guidance for women fleeing persecution, forced marriages, and honor-based violence. I was terrified at first, terrified of being seen, of my past resurfacing, of becoming a target again. But every time fear tried to paralyze me, Jesus reminded me, "You are not who they said you were. You are who I say you are." From the very first woman we took in, a trembling Iraqi girl whose family threatened to kill her for refusing an arranged marriage, I knew this was my purpose. My pain had become my ministry. My survival had become someone else's hope. My testimony had become a doorway for others to encounter Jesus. Year after year, the ministry grew. Churches joined us, volunteers came, safe houses multiplied, and each woman who walked through those doors carried a story that broke my heart and strengthened my faith. I prayed with them, cried with them, read scripture with them, and reminded them of the truth Jesus once whispered to me. You are mine. Some of the women encountered him in dreams, others through scripture, others through simple acts of love. 47 of them, 47 precious daughters, gave their lives to Jesus because of what he had done in mine. Every baptism felt like watching chains shatter. Every testimony felt like heaven touching earth. And then, something unexpected happened. I met David, a gentle, steady Christian man with kind eyes and a patient heart. We met during a church outreach event, where he was helping distribute winter clothing to refugees. Our friendship grew slowly, naturally, without pressure. For the first time in my life, I saw what love looked like when it wasn't demanded, measured, or earned. One snowy evening, as we walked along the frozen river, he stopped, looked into my eyes, and said softly, "Amira, I don't love your past. I love who Jesus is making you. Would you build a life with me?" Tears filled my eyes, not because I felt unworthy, but because, through Jesus, I finally felt ready to be loved. We married in a small ceremony surrounded by the women from Daughters of Hope and our church family. There were no palaces, no titles, no expectations, only joy. And God surprised us again. 2 years later, we adopted 2 beautiful sisters from Somalia who had escaped persecution. The moment I held them, I felt Jesus whisper, "This is redemption." Today, when I tuck them into bed, when I hear their laughter echo in our living room, when I watch them grow in freedom I once never knew, my heart overflows with gratitude. I lost everything I knew, and Jesus gave me so much more. And now, as I share this testimony with you, yes, you watching or listening, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt unseen, unloved, trapped, ashamed, too broken for God to notice? I once felt all those things, but Jesus met me in my death sentence. Jesus found me in my hiding place. Jesus walked with me through the desert. Jesus opened the borders of my life. Jesus rewrote my identity. And the same Jesus is reaching out to you right now. You may not be running from palace guards. You may not be facing execution, but maybe you are running from shame, from fear, from trauma, from your past. Listen to me carefully. Jesus sees you. Jesus loves you. Jesus wants you, not when you become better, not when you fix yourself, not when you feel worthy. Right now, exactly as you are. If he could save a woman like me, a condemned wife, a barren outcast, a fugitive, then he can save you too. There is no chain he cannot break, no lie he cannot silence, no wound he cannot heal. If your heart is stirring, if something inside you is whispering, "This is for me," then don't ignore it. Jesus is calling your name. And if you need prayer, if you need hope, if you need someone to stand beside you, leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. Our community will pray for you. I will pray for you. And if this testimony touched your heart, consider subscribing for more stories of what Jesus is doing around the world today. Because he is alive, he is moving, and he is transforming lives one story at a time.